Wanna know anything about architectural arts? Curious how it all started? Let's all become smart. Here in Architecture with your host, MAUREEN Manalo and precious SHEIRA MENDIOLA.
Good day and welcome to Architecture.
How are you, precious? It's been a while before this pandemic happened, and I miss the outside world.
I'm good. How about you? Well, yeah. I also miss a time when I went to different places with my family and friends.
I'm fine. By the way, speaking of different places, are you ready for our today's topic, which is
Architectural arts. Always ready. To be honest, I'm too excited because not to mention that our guest is something no one could ignore if they are familiar with this.
Don't spoil them. Anyway, let's give some background ideas to our audiences for today's topic.
My bad, I'm sorry. Well, the first thing that people must know is about history. And to better understand it, we have the condensed idea ground rules for PACALDOs. It was all started in 25th BC. Vitruvius writes the architecture. In 48 BC, the Tower of the Winds, Athens, is built in the Corinthian order, while in 334 BC, the tragic monument of Lysicrates, Athens, one of the greatest Corinthian structures, is constructed. And the next is in 427 BC, the Temple of Nike, Apteros, is built using the Ionic order.
Now, here we go in the year 447 and 432 BC. The Parthenon, Athens, the most famous Doric temple, is built, while in 450 BC, the Temple of Apollo at Sabugaa is built using the Doric order outside and the Ionic inside, plus a single Corinthian column within. And last but not the least is the year 590 BC. The Helion, Olympia, is constructed using the Doric order.
Keep on saying Corinthian order, Ionic order, and Doric order. Are you guys aware of it? If not, let one of our guests explain to us. From the other part of the world, let us all welcome Ryan PAMA.
He is the best known for being a good historian in the world. So Mr. Ryan, can you help us figuring out what are those order stuff?
Good day everyone, thanks for having me here. Let's get it straight. Doric is the most simple and the oldest order. The Ionic, a little bit more complicated. And the Corinthian is completely out of control. It is called the classical orders. In ancient Greece, probably around the 6th century BC, architects and stonemasons developed a system of design rules and guidelines that they could use in any building whose construction was based on the column. Take a look at this. Right, Precious?
Yeah, actually, it became known as the orders, which is the classical orders, not just in Europe and Rome, but also in later architecture all over Europe, America, and beyond.
Let's now talk about the Vitruvius and the order. Did you know the purpose why Roman writer Vitruvius produced his handbook, the Architectura?
It's because of a practical treatise of architects. It deals in its 10 books with many aspects of buildings from materials and construction to specific building types. Vitruvius has much to say about the orders, dealing with their origins, proportions, details, and application in buildings such as temple.
And wait, we have what we call the entablature and proportions. So, what is it?
There is much more to the columns and capitals because what the column supports is also part of the order. Above the column is a lintel made up of 3 horizontal bands. First comes the architrave, which is usually quite flat than the frieze, which may contain ornate sculpture. And on the top of this, the cornice, a molded section that makes the transition between the horizontal part of the order and the roof or gable. Together, these horizontal are called the entablature.
There's really a tons of things to talk about this. On architecture, those in the invention of the 2 different kinds of columns. They borrowed manly beauty, naked and unadorned. For the one, Doric, and for the other is Ionic. The delicacy, adornment, and proportion characteristic of a woman. The third or quarter called Chen is an imitation of the slender of a maiden.
Wow! So that's what those lines or designs means. It was cool. No wonder why Vitruvius became famous for defining the key qualities at which an architect should aim when designing a building. All buildings, according to Vitruvius, should have the qualities of firmitas, which means strength and durability. Utilitas, meaning usefulness, and venustas means beauty. Ever since, architects kept these qualities in mind when designing or planning their structure.
Just the first part, and it's something mind-blowing. If we're going to discuss it one by one, I will not believe that one day is enough. So how we can summarize the story, Mr. Pama?
You're indeed exactly right. I think let me tell them first a brief explanation about the history of architectural arts. Well, the exact origin of architecture could be said to date to the Neolithic period around 10,000 BC, or simply when people stopped living in caves and started handling the way they want their houses to look like and feel like. The parallelism of history of architecture to human history is justified by its strong material presence that serves as the best physical evidence of societal change. Just looking at the buildings made in different places at a different moment in time would help us understand the evolution of architecture and our past without using any words. Here are the series of major architectural periods. Please read.
Yes, Mr. Pama, series of major architectural period buildings of the era look like. Please bear with us. The first one is the classical, La Madeleine Pierre, Alexandre Vignon. Next is Gothic, Notre Dame, Barrios and the Renaissance, Santa Maria del Fiore, Barrios. Then here we go with Buch's Art, Paris Opera House, Charles Garnier, up to Art Nouveau, Casa Milla, Anthony Gaudi. Second to the last is modern Gutierrez-Sabugaa, Le Corbusier. And finally, the next modern Disney concert hall, Frank Gehry. Architects and designers of today use the great eras of architecture as inspiration. This era also challenged designers to continue designing efficient, safe, and sustainable buildings for everyday use.
Thank you, Miss Maureen. So that's the shortest explanation of architectural arts history. I hope you understand it even in just short period of time.
Thank you also, Mr. Pama, for joining us here, and I think that's enough. Break, please. At least 2 to 4 minutes. But while we are having some stress, let's all watch some additional information.
Wait. Before we watch it, please be prepared because we will going to introduce our next guest later. By the way, thank you again, Mr. Pama. Have a nice day.
Bye!
Of all the ancient architectural styles, Greek architecture has proven to be the most enduring. Sure, the Egyptians built some impressive structures, and the Romans pulled off some amazing feats of engineering. But you don't see us building pyramids anymore, at least nowhere but Vegas, and even Roman engineering marvels incorporated Greek form and style. Greek architecture is more than just impressive, it is timeless. You don't have to dig in ruins to find Greek architecture. It's all around you. Don't believe me? Go visit a civic structure, city hall, a theater, a bank, a library, a museum. Or if you're really ambitious, head to DC, or any Western capital for that matter. What do you see? Columns, 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 columns. In short, if you want a Westerner to think something is important, put columns on it. And not just any columns, Greek columns. Greek columns come in 3 varieties, or orders: Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. All 3 share the same fluted column, or drum. Where they differ is at the top, what is called the capital of the column. And what better place to learn about column capitals than at our nation's capital? For of all the world's cities, none is more indebted to classical Greek architecture than Washington, D.C. Let us start with the Lincoln Memorial. Look at those lovely columns. These are columns of the Doric order, the simplest of the Greek columns, with a tapered disc supporting a square top. Now let's skip along to the Jefferson Memorial. See those little curlies at the top? That tells us that these are columns of the Ionic order. Let us end our tour at the Capitol building itself. See that fancy filigree at the top of the columns? Sort of looks like a very symmetrical plant tried to grow at the top. This is a column of the Corinthian order. Corinthian columns come in many forms, each more ornate than the last, but they all share the same undeniably leafy quality. There, now you know the 3 orders of Greek columns, and can impress or annoy your friends by pointing them out as you walk around town. Yet there was more to Greek architecture than just columns. The Greeks built breathtaking temples, as well as treasuries, stadiums, and theaters. Your basic Greek temple is a roofed rectangle, surrounded by columns. That's me in front of a particularly old Greek temple in Corinth. What sort of columns are those? That's right, Doric. Well done. Anyway, these temples had a long, angled roof, peaking on the short ends to form a triangle called a pediment. These shallow shelters were filled with life-size sculptures. The roof rested upon an even plane called an entablature, which spanned the gaps between columns to provide a solid surface. As temple building developed, architects added decorations to the entablature, called metopes, separated from each other by 3 lines called a triglyph. Further developments and bigger temples led to the addition of a second row of columns with a continuous decoration called a frieze running along the top. Inside the temple was a smaller enclosure called a naos, lined with its own columns. This was the holiest place of the temple, and usually housed an idol of the deity for whom the temple was built. Sometimes the Greeks would switch up column styles within the naos, putting the hefty Doric on the outside and the delicate Ionic or Corinthian within. Perhaps the most famous Greek temple is the Parthenon. The Athenians began building this temple to Athena in 447 BCE and did not complete it until 15 years later. Like all Greek city-states, the Athenians built their most impressive temples atop the highest point in town, called the Acropolis, literally high city. The Parthenon had all the elements of a Greek temple: the columns and entablature, the pediment full of sculptures. It even had the extra features: metopes depicting a battle between centaurs and lapiths, and the second row of columns, with their accompanying frieze depicting a civic procession of Athenians in exquisite detail. And within, the Naos, recreated here by the fine folks at Nashville's Centennial Park. Big idol of Athena on the inside.
Slowly kisses passing by the river.
Welcome back to our lecture. Maureen, do you think you know exactly what materials, color, light, shape, mass, space, and texture your house consists of?
Of course, I do know most of it, but the math, I'm not sure. That's a good point to ask Precious, because our second guest is an architect, and guess who is he?
Clue. Someone who is well known around the world, and his last name is somehow connected to the word gold.
Yes, and he is also one of the most famous architects in the world today. Without further ado, let us all welcome Frank Owen Goldbridge, aka Frank Gehry. Hi, Architect Frank!
Hello! By the way, thanks for inviting me in this show.
You're welcome, Mr. Frank. Let's now begin with this question. Just like what Precious mentioned earlier, what are the meaning of the materials, color, line, shape, mass, space, and texture? Why is it important?
You know what, young woman? That is what we call the elements of architectural arts. Material is the matter from which a thing is or can be made. The use of materials in architectural design has evolved from early materials, which are the available rock, hides, and wood, to modern materials, which are the glass, steel, and concrete. It is used to build or to construct any architectural structure.
Materials also had a history from early to modern. So why is it important? Aside from it's one of the basic things that architect must choose wisely. And what is the good material between early and modern?
Good question. Materials is important because building materials signifies structural existence. It demonstrates the presence of aesthetic sense in a design and hence defines the practicability of the structure. The use of building materials while designing a structure is symbolic of its existence in the field of architectural visualization. About what is the good material between the two, it actually depends on the concept of what architect is planning.
Okay, get the idea. Here is a photo of modern materials in urban environment. Its latest developments include metal production and the use of plastics in the materials sector. I realize now that architectural design evolved to make the best use of the available materials, creating new methods and able to expand the design opportunities.
Wow! I can't believe that you, Mr. Frank. Now, what about the color, line, and shape?
Color is an aspect of architectural design which provides a wide array of potential effects. Color may be used strategically to provide emphasis to the character of a building or component. It may be used to accentuate form and materials, or it may be used to separate and define distinct division of an overall scheme. Color has a three characteristics, which are the hue that relates to the pure state of color, its essence, value which relates to the depth of hue, contained either defined as light or dark, and intensity that refers to the saturation of color. Chroma intensity defines the purify of the final color relative to its original state.
Ooh, that is a long definition. But in an easy perspective, color is a spectrum seen by reflecting. Hue is the name of the color, value is the lightness or darkness, and intensity is the brightness or dimness.
Excellent. Now the use of line represents the most basic of architectural design elements. Line define the shape, form, and volume of a design solution. They also create a sense of rhythm and flow within a solution, while the shape as design elements relative to architectural principles refers to the two-dimensional representation of form. Shape is the outline, silhouette, or basic form of structure that which is the simplest to perceive in built form. It's important because those elements are all working together in order to achieve the main goal of every architect. The mass of an architectural design solution is the three-dimensional aspect of the shapes. These elements represent the geometric look or block of the shape. Massing is an element based on the presence of surface to create its form. Mass have different types, which is the geometric massing, natural massing, abstracted, and non-objective.
To my research, a positive space is one that presents the enclosure, the actual form. It contains a measured volume of enclosure that is visual and tangible. A negative space is the void enclosed by the form. Negative spaces may be said to be the inferior volumes of a design. Right, Mr. Frank Gehry?
Yes, that's right. Thanks, Google. Just kidding. The last one is the texture. It relates to the surface appearance of an item. Texture is perceived architecturally in two ways, visual and tactile. Texture in materials relates to the manner by which we perceive the feeling of an item's surface, smooth, rough, soft, etc. The texture is an important element of architectural design as it will be define the initial aesthetic of the building. Variations on the degree of texture will create individual effects.
That was a super detailed information. Thanks for sharing your valuable knowledge, Mr. Architect Frank. Everyone, once again, Architect Frank Gehry. speechless because of the various knowledge about it. I think this is already our cue.
Once again, this is Archi-Lecture. Lecture for the future. Start with architectural arts and it in your heart.
Thanks be to God, and to God be the glory.